Hi. Um, this talk will be a postmortem for my game Social Democracy and Alternate History. This is a re-recording of a talk from June with mostly the same script, so some information may be outdated. Just a bit of a content warning, this talk is going to be somewhat political. I will be talking about historical politics and making the inevitable references to modern-day politics because this is a game about real-world politics. First, a brief introduction. I'm Chen. I am not a professional writer or game developer, but I do love interactive fiction. And I've created a lot of games ranging from dating sims to stories about fanfiction communities to political simulation games, which is what we'll talk about here. I also help to host game jams as part of the Neo Interactives group. You can find my website in the top left corner, or you can find my games and other stuff. So in this talk, I'll first be giving a brief overview of the game, and then go through some of the inspirations and real-life background about it. Then I'll discuss the development process, the tools and models that went into the game. Finally, I'll talk about the surprising reaction that I encountered and maybe even some applicability to the various political situations in the real world today. First, a brief overview of the game. Social Democracy and Alternate History was a game I released in 2024 for a spring thing, where it won one of the Best in Show awards. You can see a screenshot of what the game looks like on the left, and you can also find the link here. This is a political simulation game with some card game elements, where you play as the Social Democratic Party of Germany in the years 1928 through 1934 during the late Weimar Republic period, when German democracy was under threat from the Nazis. Your objective is to stop the Nazis, to save the Weimar Republic, usually by winning elections or possibly by building a paramilitary to stop them by force. You have to do parliamentary politics, participate in elections, and make politics. You can find the game online here. You can play it right now if you want. And there's a sequel called Social Democracy, Petrograd 1917, about the Russian Revolution, which was released earlier this year and is still being updated. So this is a brief overview of the gameplay. The main interface consists of three pieces: the decks, the hand of cards, and the advisors. The decks, there are two possible decks, including party actions and government actions. Clicking a deck to draw cards is a free action, and the player may have at most 3 or 4 cards in the hand at a time, depending on the difficulty. Player actions include playing a card or an advisor action. Cards are randomly drawn from the decks, while advisors are not random but are pinned cards and can be used at any time but with a cooldown period. They all represent historical figures. And cards and advisor actions usually advance the game's timer by 1 month. There are also events which occur at deterministic times and which players must react to before continuing. And cards, events, and advisor actions leads to choice-based storylets, as we see here on the left with the campaigning card, where you can make certain choices that might cost resources and have effects in the game's model. Now, I'm going to be talking about the prehistory of the game, the inspirations, and so on. So Social Democracy and Alternate History is a political simulation game, and I feel like it belongs to a long lineage of games that started with the Sumerian game, which is the screenshot on the left, which was one of the earliest computer games of all time. As long as computers have existed, people have tried to simulate economy and society, and I think Social Democracy is a part of that lineage of games. A somewhat more direct and relevant inspiration might be Hidden Agenda from 1988. This is a game about a fictional post-revolutionary Central American country where you make decisions by talking to people and watch the social, economic, and political fallout of your decisions. It influenced Social Democracy a great deal in terms of the storylet structure mostly. These are some of the more recent inspirations behind the game. Europa Universalis 2 here is being used as a stand-in for the entire genre of paradox-like grand strategy games, which I play a lot of, and are kind of crucial in the political simulation genre. More recently, Suzerain and Through the Darkest of Times were really direct inspirations for this game. Suzerain's combination of politics and policy were an inspiration for the range of actions possible in social democracy. And Through the Darkest of Times was a major part of what made me interested in this time and place in history in the first place. It's a game about the anti-Nazi resistance, and it's a game where you'll fail a lot if you're unlucky. It's very hard to win, and it's not really possible to change the broader strokes of history. It's very much unlike social democracy in that it's an individual view of history rather than the bird's eye view of history from an entire political party, and I would recommend that game a great deal. So the broader context of this game is, well, we can't avoid talking about the world today. I tend to be somewhat pessimistic and anxious about politics, so I had a premonition of what was coming when I started writing this game in 2023. I started writing this game in part because I heard a lot of comparisons of our current era with the Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic was an era of relative social tolerance compared to what came before and after. It was something that I thought would be worth defending, even in awe of its imperfections. So, can gaming out historical politics help us find a way out of our current political crisis? Honestly, I think the answer is probably no, and I'll get more into this towards the end of the talk. On that note, let's talk about game mechanics and design and development. DendryNexus is the engine that social democracy and alternate history is based on. It was developed from two existing interactive fiction platforms, Dendry and StoryNexus, hence the name. The code base is a fork of Dendry, and the interface is based on StoryNexus, which was a tool created by Failbetter Games, which is most well known as the engine behind Fallen London. So one of the reasons that social democracy and alternate history exists is because of the Dragon Age game, The Last Court, which is kind of a lost game right now. I'm a big fan of Dragon Age, and I played The Last Court right before it was taken offline. The Last Court was also written in StoryNexus, and after StoryNexus went dormant and The Last Court disappeared, I became interested in trying to recreate the whole StoryNexus system so that we can build Dragon Age The Last Court. I have not done that last part. Yeah, and the gameplay in DendryNexus is very similar to StoryNexus with card game mechanics and quality-based narrative or storylines. So two of the main game interaction methods in social democracy and alternate history are cards and events. I won't get into advisors for now. Cards are where the randomness comes from. They are randomly drawn from the deck. You can hold either 3 or 4 cards in the hand at a time, depending on the difficulty. They represent player actions, either a party action, which you see on the top row, or a government action, which is only possible when you have control of government, which is on the bottom row. In my opinion, randomness helps to introduce a sense of chaos into the game. It kind of represents the political difficulty in making party decisions and the chaos inherent to politics in the Weimar Republic. And when you get a card, players can usually choose whether to play a card or to do nothing and skip it. There are a total of 42 cards in the game in both decks. On the other hand, events are entirely deterministic and reactive. The player is forced to interact with them in order to proceed in the game. They represent circumstances that the SVD is forced to interact with. Many of them represent certain historical events, like the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which was a treaty that banned the use of offensive war, which was ineffective in real life and also in the game. Or something like Black Thursday, the beginning of the Great Depression. There are also events that are consequences of other actions, like the vote of no confidence. And there are a total of about 76 events in the game. Now I'm going to talk briefly about the historical research that went into the game and how it relates to the mechanics. I was not a Weimar Republic fan or a history fan before making the game. When I did research on the historical period and the Social Democratic Party, Donna Harsh's book, German Social Democracy and the Rise of Nazism, effectively acted as a Bible for my game. One thing I like about the book is that it provides key events that could have happened but didn't. I organized the game around major and minor divergences. What if the WTP plan passed? What if Karl Severing and Olive Braun deported Hitler? Stuff like that. So the WTP plan was a major choice. It was one of the major the lost opportunities that the Social Democratic Party failed to take advantage of. It's an economic plan that was basically a neo-deal adjacent, deficit-funded Keynesian and economic plan proposed by some of the trade unionists. And of course, deporting Hitler is one of the most iconic actions of the game. It was genuinely proposed historically, but the federal government at the time, controlled by the Center Party, refused to deport Hitler. And there are also a lot of minor decisions, like which demographics to campaign with, which internal factions to favor, which other parties we want to try to build relationships with. These are choices that the real-life SVD made, and these are choices that you can make in the game, which are represented by the repeatable cards. So I tried to be somewhat historically accurate in the game, but as with all alternate history, there will be some parts that I just made up, like the effects of actions that didn't happen. Like, we don't know if the WTV plan would have actually worked, even if it worked in the game. We don't know, like, what effects deporting Hitler would have had in reality. So what happens is I'm just making something up here, and people might disagree with my particular choices in implementation. So now let's talk about the game's model for a bit. What do we need to model to simulate some of the most relevant historical causes behind the rise of the Nazis? The game's model comes with it an implicit theory of history, an implicit theory of why the Weimar Republic fell. I base this off reading books and papers, like the books that was mentioned in the last page, along with some others. It makes a lot of assumptions about politics and economics, which are probably debatable. The basic model of the game involves demographics, economics, and ideology. Demographic is mostly economic class, meaning urban versus rural, working class versus the new and old middle classes and the unemployed. The only religious demographic represented are the Catholics, who were the largest religious minority in Weimar Germany and had a unique set of politics. The economics model in the game is pretty simple. It contains unemployment, inflation, and economic growth, and it's mostly based on Keynesian economics and the Phillips curve type of stuff. And there's ideology. The game, the most important bit of ideology is support for the Republic. There's also implemented support for nationalism, militarism, and socialism, but those don't really have much of any effect in the game. And here are just a couple of the references that went to making this model. So here's a very simplified graph that represents the theory behind the game, and I am speaking from the game's perspective here, and not necessarily that of a historian. The white boxes are what's baked in. It's what you can't change in the course of the game. But most of the things in gray are more or less explicit parts of the game or are references to the game, and that you can affect to some extent. In the game, basically, what I wanted to show was that the fall of the Weimar Republic and the rise of the Nazis is not monocausal. It was a whole tangle of different factors. But I think that the most important proximate cause was probably the Great Depression. A lot of people think that the Weimar Republic fell because of hyperinflation, but that's not really true. In fact, the Weimar Republic in 1930 to 1933 during the Great Depression experienced severe deflation. It was austerity and unemployment combined with the incomplete democratization, the legacy of militarism, nationalism, and anti-Semitism, and the legacy of the Treaty of Versailles. But without the Great Depression, the Grand Coalition government could probably have survived and made some progress in reconciliation and democratization. With regards to unemployment, the unemployed and working class were not the main Nazi supporters. Unemployed workers tended to support the communists. The core Nazi support in terms of class were the proletarianizing old middle class and rural middle class. They were people who were not working class, but were economically fearful of becoming poor or unemployed. And that was the core Nazi support. But the effects of austerity did decrease working class support for the SVD. It led people to either not vote at all or to vote for the Communist Party instead, which was in part what led to the political instability here. On the right-hand side of the graph, we have the political factors, like the legacy of Hindenburg's Camarilla, which was Hindenburg's secret cabinet of advisors, and the legacy of the Kaiserreich, the German Empire, which led to incomplete democratization and the heavy prevalence of militarism and nationalism. The Treaty of Versailles was the peace treaty that ended the Great War that everyone hated, even the pacifists and the socialists and communists. And that led to the stab in the back myth that blamed the Social Democrats and communists and center and liberal parties for the defeat in the Great War, which was a lie because the military was basically already defeated by that point. And finally, there was the Spartacus uprising and the German October, which were two instances when the communist workers tried to overthrow the republic and establish a Soviet republic, which caused the right wing and even some social democrats to become extremely paranoid about communists. Even in 1929 or 1930, when the communists were in no position to do a revolution, everyone was still really paranoid about them, and that caused some of the right-wing radicalization that led to Hitler being appointed chancellor. Okay, so I think part of the game's success was its images and music. The cool thing about making a game set in the 1920s is that most pictures from when the game was set and the music before 1925, I think, should all be in the public domain in the US. Almost all of the images in the game came from Wikimedia Commons, and the music came from the Internet Archive. There are some great categories in Wikimedia Commons like 1929 Berlin or the election posters of the Social Democratic Party that I use a lot. Next, reception and community. Somehow the game got really popular. It went viral on Twitter right about when it first came out, and it's had a few other viral peaks since. PC Gamer wrote an article about it, the German newspaper TASS wrote about it, and a bunch of popular YouTubers and TikTok people played it, apparently. People whom I know nothing about, who somehow have hundreds of thousands of followers. In total, in the year since it came out, it had over 1.6 million views and over 1 million plays, which is more than all of my other games combined by far. Somehow there's a niche of people who are really interested in the Weimar Republic, and beyond that, I feel like the story of fighting against fascism and authoritarianism is just resonant to a lot of people in the world right now. So this is the community of this game. The numbers are current as of this June. They are somewhat outdated. The subreddit had around 3,500 subscribers. The Discord had over 1,000 members. And I mostly stay hands-off from the community because I don't have the time or energy or mental bandwidth to do community management. It's all unofficial, but it's become basically self-sustaining because of the mods. The general format of the game has become kind of a micro-genre. On GitHub, there are over 200 forks, as of this time, over 300 now, most of which are intended to be mods, most of which are incomplete or abandoned, but some have made a lot of progress. Some notable mods are, for example, Biennio Rosso, which is about the Italian time period where you try to stop Mussolini while playing as the Italian Socialist Party. Someone made a mod for this game as part of a history class about Mikhail Gorbachev at the end of the Soviet Union. And there are some other mods which expand certain things from the original game, like more details on the other parties or more alternate history events or state elections and stuff, which are not represented in the original game, like, for example, the Social Democracy Redux mod or the Dynamic Social Democracy mod. You have done a lot more research into the Weimar Republic than I have, to be honest. They've done tons of work on the mods here. Lessons. So this is about the relevance of the Weimar Republic to the present day. Modern politics will be mentioned. Writing this game made me think of everything going on in world politics in terms of Weimar Republic analogies. This is a bit outdated, but when I see headlines like these, I was like, wow, this is just like the Prussian coup d'etat of 1932, when the Franz von Papen overthrew the Prussian state government of Otto Braun. As a background, the Reich's execution was a constitutional move by which the German Imperial or Weimar Republic government could remove a state government from power if it was found incapable of doing its duties. And this is an imperfect analogy to the present-day US because the present-day US Constitution has no provisions for anything like a Reich's execution. But the Prussian coup was also ruled unconstitutional, but the right-wing judiciary decided that they couldn't do anything about it, that they would not restore the Prussian government that was illegally removed. Okay, so what can we learn from the Weimar SPD? The 1920s to 1930s were a fundamentally different era for politics, economy, and society. Today's politics are very different from the 1920s and 30s. As an example, if you play the game and try to organize women, you'll know that, unfortunately, women still disproportionately support the bourgeois parties, the center-right conservative parties. This is kind of the opposite polarity from what we have today in the US and in a lot of other countries. The Weimar era SPD failed. What can we learn from them? First of all, I think austerity in response to the Great Depression was a total failure. One other lesson is that an imperfect democracy like the Weimar Republic is still worth fighting for, still worth defending, because things can always get worse. Does this game teach you how to fight fascism? No, I don't think so. You have to do that in the real world. But like, I hope the game can be motivating in that it shows that things can always be different and alternate futures are possible. Okay, thank you. That's all. And here are some credits for the images used in the talk.